in this country, the British media is parasitic and it's nasty. And something must be done. I even forgot the shade borough, you lot. I've been saying lot from a while back, but the shade borough as well. And I believe them and Novara Media. I want to know who is funding you lot, because I feel that there are nefarious characters that are funding you so you can be a psyop.
Malcolm X once warned that the white liberal could be more dangerous than the conservative. His argument was simple. The conservative, he said, was the wolf. You knew where you stood, but the liberal was the fox. The fox smiled. The fox presented itself as your friend. And Malcolm believed that made the fox more dangerous because it could still attempt to control where black people went, who represented them, and what their struggle was allowed to become. More than 60 years later, Britain in 2026 is obviously not Malcolm X's America. And the people involved in the Jason Arday story cannot simply be divided into black and white, liberal and conservative. But following the death of Professor Jason Arday, something very strange has started happening. Some black Britons aren't only furious with the conservative newspapers that spent weeks attacking Arday, they're turning their anger towards the people who were supposedly on the other side, the liberal media. And suddenly, Malcolm's old warning doesn't sound quite as distant as it used to.
Good morning to everybody except for white supremacists. No good morning for you. You can choke. There are people who are making wonderful videos explaining things in such a respectful and respectable way. I'm not here to do that. I'm going to say some things. The first thing I want to start off with is you lot keep talking about accountability regarding Jason Arday. Oh, the press were just trying to hold him accountable. You couldn't hold a match accountable to a flame. Don't try it, because if you could hold people accountable, what about the Grenfell fire? What about the Grenfell fire where at least I will say 72 people died in that fire? Not one person, not from the people who provided the cladding that made the whole place go up in flames to the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. Nobody has been held accountable. You didn't plaster their faces across all of the newspapers. You didn't run over 200 articles about them. But a man who made some mistakes here and there is who you lot wanted to drag across the coals, and the Times newspaper paying for adverts to attack him further. Is it Julia Hartley-Brewer? You little...
Jason Arday's death has completely changed the conversation around him. Only days earlier, Britain seemed almost obsessed with determining whether the Cambridge professor was everything he claimed to be. Questions were being asked about his academic work, his autobiography, his qualifications, his charity work, stories he'd told about his life. But that isn't really the question tearing through black British social media now. The question is, how the hell did this become that big? Because Jason Arday wasn't the Prime Minister. He wasn't running the Bank of England. He wasn't the head of MI6. He was an academic. And yet for weeks, one man's disputed biography somehow became a national obsession.
You can't talk about accountability when you don't actually hold anybody accountable. And then you've got the everyday people who are now saying that journalists' names shouldn't be published, that wrote articles about Jason Arday. They absolutely should be published. That was a digital lynching. And some of you, specifically white women, are almost trying to humanize and feel sorry for the people who did the lynching. Oh, we don't know what they're going through. Well, we clearly saw what Jason Arday was going through. That didn't move you. Why is it in the face of black people experiencing violence, some of you can try and rationalize it and then humanize the people who are inflicting the violence? What is the sickness that is in you? What is that sickness that makes you do that? I felt the need to say this today because I feel like we do need to do more. I don't have the answers, right? I'm just here to kind of share my thoughts and try to connect the dots. But we do need a mass boycott of these newspapers. Any of them that participated in this, and I hear that Channel 4 is even planning to platform one of the people that was really coming at Jason Arday. The Times, The Spectator, even Novara Media, those. We need to stop interacting with all of them, not just the papers, the physical papers, or their channels, but online as well. All of their channels, we need to have a blackout on all of them. That's all.
His shortcomings weren't simply treated as Jason Arday's shortcomings, they became evidence in a much bigger ideological trial. Was diversity a scam? Had universities abandoned merit? Was the woke establishment deliberately promoting incompetent black people? Had Britain been conned? Suddenly, Jason Arday wasn't a person anymore. He was an argument. And while you'd expect publications on the political right to jump on something like that, what has shocked some people is just how comfortable supposedly progressive media became participating in the spectacle, which brings us to Novara Media. Novara built its reputation as an alternative to Britain's traditional media establishment, the kind of organization whose audience often believes mainstream British journalism is fundamentally broken. But before Jason Arday died, Novara joined the conversation. Aaron Bastani discussed Arday extensively and publicly described him as a conman. Novara subsequently published an article titled "The Jason Arday Saga is a Story of Great British Gullibility." Its opening declaration was blunt: Britain is a nation of suckers. Then Jason Arday died. Suddenly the tone changed. Novara ran coverage asking whether the media had gone too far. Ash Sarkar argued that racism helped push Arday to the top of Britain's news agenda, asking whether alleged academic plagiarism involving an obscure professor would ever have dominated national media for so long had that professor been white, and Aaron Bastani himself acknowledged that some of his language had been wrong.
I want to talk about my own role in the weeks preceding the death of Jason Arday, and to apologise. I'm not going to speak about whether the journalism covering the story was merited or if there was a public interest in the media following the story. That was covered to some extent on last night's show, and you can find discussions about it elsewhere. There are a few things I want to say, though. First, it's beyond doubt that much of the deluge of coverage aimed at Jason Arday wasn't just racialised, but racist. After being told of his state of mind by someone I trust and admire, I said I'd stop talking about the story, which I did. But that doesn't excuse what I'd already done. Again, I won't touch on our reporting here nor seek to defend it, not least because I, personally, was guilty of something much, much worse.
He said that professionally he had erred and ethically he had really screwed up. That doesn't mean Novara has suddenly accepted responsibility for everything that happened to Jason Arday. Far from it. But it does create an incredibly uncomfortable image because an organization founded partly on the premise that mainstream media creates distorted narratives suddenly found itself accused of participating in one. And people noticed. Kelechi Okafor is now among the black British voices weighing into the wider argument, and she's not alone.
I hope you're happy now. The Guardian, The Times, The Telegraph, Novara Media, all of you. I hope you are happy now, right? And even the ones that I missed out, the rags, the tabloids that will add their own, the Daily Fail, all of you people who wanted to do your Substacks and your think pieces and your Medium pieces and your threads and your tweets and your every thing, every TikTok video, every TikTok live, every Instagram live, I you to hell, you pieces of, you dizzy. When we were looking at the numbers, like, this is disproportionate. This level of coverage is disproportionate to what this man has allegedly done. Oh no, he needs to be held accountable because rare and the rare. And now Jason Arday's dead. Dead. But until something like this happened, I don't think you lot will take it seriously that the media in this country, the British media, is parasitic and it's nasty. And something must be done. I even forgot the shade borough, you lot. I've been saying lot from a while back, but the shade borough as well. And I believe them and Novara Media. I want to know who is funding you lot, because I feel that there are nefarious characters that are funding you so you can be a psyop. Why do we lack nuance? Why do motherfuckers lack nuance? Why must it be these false dichotomies and these binaries that we create that it's either this or that? Life doesn't work that way. That is how our minds have been conditioned by white supremacist society, that we only can operate at extremes. You're not going to make a Libra baby girl like me do that. I want to know, where is the balance in this? Where does this even out? Because something not right. Novara, please divest from Novara Media. Please divest from the shade borough or any shade. Divest from it. Stop. Because they are anti-black. An article came out a little while after I'd made my video and I tweeted about it to confirm what I said. But in the meantime, Novara Media, Ash Sakar, Aaron Bastani, Aaron Bastani specifically decided to quote tweet me, I believe, and then my video and say, this is ridiculous. So then all of these right-wing started sending me death threats, started sending me hate mail. My mentions were a mess on Twitter. And this is meant to be the alternative news platform, right? How is it that even with an alternative news platform, it's still anti-black? So you try to be alternative in every other respect except for the anti-blackness.
Across social media, people who would ordinarily consider themselves progressive, people who would probably never read The Telegraph or watch GB News, have started asking what exactly separated parts of the liberal media from the right-wing press during the Arday spectacle.
I'm surprised that Novara Media's coverage of Jason Arday was bad. What I'm surprised about is that one of the presenters of that coverage was on Sky News yesterday talking about how the media should have been more measured in their coverage of the story. How dare you? This is a person that said that Jason Arday was bad at his job, that he was waffling in his lectures, and could not be bothered to critically analyse where this story had come from. I'm pointing out Novara Media especially because they claim to be a news source of the left. Therefore, we're going to hold you to higher standards. In their reporting, something I find really ironic was that there was no original reporting, no double checking of facts. They were just spouting the same thing that the right-wing media had reported. Is that not the same plagiarism that you were accusing Jason Arday of? If you wanted a left-wing analysis of this story, you could look into why there is so much pressure to publish on professors, on academics, not even to get promotions, but just to keep their job. You would look at the institution and commercialization of academia, and you would see that a lot of new research published are just repetitions of theories and things that have already been proven in the past. Data sets are reused constantly. It is a very common practice in academia because there is not money and resources allocated to original research, especially in the field of sociology. It's not uncommon for data sets, and this is qualitative data in sociology, to be used again and again by the same researchers. Why? Because they are pressured to have new bibliographies, pressured to have new references, citations that are more modern. It doesn't matter the contents of the paper. That's not Jason Arday's fault. That's an institutional problem. Instead, the critical analysis that Novara Media offered was this reporter saying, oh, I've had black academics say that there's a target on their back now because of this Jason Arday story, without questioning the racism in putting one person as the poster face of their entire race. I couldn't even bother to watch the Sky News interview. I'm so angry. But something that really pisses me off about Novara Media is that this has become an incubation center so that they can go to the legacy media corporations that they claim to hate. Aaron Bastani, Michael Walker love to go on GP News. And let me tell you something, when they're invited to Sky News, GB News, BBC, whatever, they're offered £50 and 30 minutes notice to get on the screen. You're a tap dancer. You're a backup dancer. You're an afterthought. And everything before and after you speak continues to reiterate the white supremacist world that these people live in. You act as if you're going there to add to a debate, going there to offer a different perspective. You are going there to be laughed at. And the media platform that you are supposed to be building, you are using to regurgitate right-wing talking points. Do better. Bloody hell, like, where is your journalistic integrity? I stopped being in support of Novara Media years ago when their co-founder Aaron Bastani started dobbing in Palestinian protesters to the police. And so often I thought that the people of colour, especially women of colour that are constantly pushed to the front to talk about these issues, are hostages, but actually they're exactly where they want to be, right? You would leave. There's been enough instances where you would leave, enough instances of anti-blackness, enough instances of regurgitating right-wing stories without interpreting why these are stories. The eugenicist who started this story is still walking free and Jason Arday is dead. You mocked him, you laughed at him, you said that his lecture was pure waffle. Hello, can any students please comment in the chat if you've never been to a lecture that hasn't been waffled before? Is that a death sentence? Is that somebody that is supposed to die? And why was this Novara Media presenter offered this Sky News slot? Is so that they could say, oh, we've got a person of colour to speak about the Jason Arday case. They said that we need to be a bit more measured. They can use the conservative tone. They can use the, oh, can we just dial it back a bit? They can do the pleading, and the rest of us can continue without any type of self-shame, without any type of reflection. That is what it is to be a DEI hire.
There's a growing suspicion among some Black Britons that sharing progressive politics with a media institution doesn't necessarily mean that institution shares your interests. And that is where Malcolm X becomes uncomfortable, because Malcolm wasn't warning Black people exclusively about openly hostile institutions. He was warning them about institutions that describe themselves as allies.
Being friendly and being a friend, I think, are two different things. I think there are many whites who act friendly toward Negroes. A fox acts friendly toward the lamb. And usually the fox is the one who ends up with the lamb chop on his plate. The wolf doesn't act friendly, and therefore the wolf has more difficulty in getting the lamb chop in his plate. You study the structure of the Negro community, economically, politically, civically, psychologically, and otherwise. It's controlled by the white liberal, who usually poses as the friend of the Negro, who actually differs from the white conservative in the same way that the fox differs from the wolf. Their appetite is the same. Their motives are the same. It's only their mannerisms and methods that differ.
Nowhere is that tension more complicated than The Guardian. The Guardian openly identifies itself with liberal journalism, and unlike Novara, it wasn't merely commenting on the Jason Arday story. It did substantial original reporting. Its journalists examined allegations around Arday's academic work and investigated elements of his biography. One Guardian article laid out questions concerning plagiarism, endurance running claims, charity fundraising, qualifications, and other parts of the story Arday had publicly told about himself. And again, that is journalism. You can't seriously argue that. Because someone is Black, journalists aren't allowed to investigate whether something they've publicly claimed is true. But The Guardian itself also recognized that something disturbing was happening around the story. Even before Arday died, its own commentators were warning that the controversy was being weaponized by the political right. Jason Okundai wrote that Arday's resignation was justified, while simultaneously warning that his downfall would become ammunition against Black advancement. Afua Hirsch argued that Arday was being transformed into a weapon against racial equality. Nesreen Malik wrote that whatever was wrong with Arday's story, the wider conversation around diversity had itself entered a distorted reality. Think about how strange that is. Inside one publication, you effectively had two stories happening at the same time. Story one, there are serious questions about Jason Arday. And story two, look at what Britain is doing with those questions. Then Jason Arday died, and the contradiction became impossible to ignore. The Guardian's editorial board subsequently called his death a tragedy demanding reflection, while defending the importance of responsible investigation and criticizing the way Arday had been turned into an anti-diversity symbol. But as anger continued growing, The Guardian went further. It issued an official statement defending its journalism. The paper said its reporting resulted from months of detailed work. It described its coverage as responsible and rigorous. It rejected allegations about improper motivations, and it condemned what it said had become targeted and sometimes racialized harassment of its journalists. In other words, The Guardian isn't apologizing, it's standing on the reporting.
And then the Good Law Project published its account of what happened at The Guardian. And this part matters specifically because it involves a warning sent before Jason died, not concern invented afterwards when everyone suddenly remembered how to sound compassionate. On the 31st of July at around 9 in the morning, a friend of Jason emailed Guardian editor-in-chief Catherine Viner directly. The email raised concerns about Jason's well-being. It also questioned whether Lanray Bakari was the right journalist to write about him, given what Jason had reportedly said about the lack of trust between them. Viner did not reply personally. Archie Bland, The Guardian's head of national news, responded on her behalf and dismissed the concerns. The article was published, and that was that, they thought. Well, now the Guardian disputes the Good Lord Project's version of events. Well, fine, you can do that. Put the emails before an inquiry, in which case. Put the editorial decisions before an inquiry. Let everyone involved explain exactly what they knew and what they were told and why they still went ahead. That'd be a lot more useful than the press investigating itself, wouldn't it? Gazing into their own navels and declaring everything absolutely wonderful because someone raised the alarm, didn't they? And they did it in writing. And the warning reached the editor-in-chief's office and the article still went out anyway. That's not hindsight. That was a decision made with a warning already on the table.
So the question isn't, should Jason Arday have been investigated? Obviously. The real question is, when does investigation become spectacle?
I've been thinking a lot about Jason Arday in the last few days. As someone who works as a journalist, I've worked in England, worked in Ireland, I've worked in Australia, and I think we can all agree, well, good thinking people would agree that Jason Arday is dead because he's black. But I think what other people who aren't journalists are missing is it's actually more cynical than that, because we're in the middle of August. We were at the start of August when this all kicked off. This is what's known as silly season for journalists. So Westminster will be in recess, courts are in recess, people are in holidays, the schools are out. We call this silly season as journalists. You will see the worst news stories and the most pointless news stories and loads of clickbait at this time of the year because journalists don't have anything to do. We still have to work, the world keeps going, but everyone's off on holidays. So last year or the year before, we saw loads of coverage of small boat crossings in England. The numbers of small boat crossings actually hadn't gone up. It just, in the summer, there was nothing going on. And when journalists know that people are going to click on something, they'll just keep going. And I think what's happened is not only is Jason Arday a victim because he's black, I think he's also a victim of the Netflixification of everything. Everyone's looking for the next Tinder swindler. Everyone's looking for the next Belle Gibson. The next scam goddess is coming and everyone wants everything to be a Netflix documentary. But worse than that, Jason Arday is dead because there was nothing else going on. There was journalists that had work to do and people kept clicking on it. And that, I think, is one of the most appalling things about all this.
Once Jason Arday became symbolic, every ideological faction suddenly needed a piece of him. For conservatives, Arday became proof that diversity had gone too far. Look what happens when you prioritize identity over merit. For liberals, before the scandal, Arday's extraordinary rise could represent progress. Look what becomes possible when institutions finally open their doors. And once those two narratives collided, the human being trapped between them almost became irrelevant. This is why the reaction after his death has been so intense.
So if you're choosing to be and refuse to accept that a targeted racist media witch hunt hounded Jason Arday until he passed away, then this breakdown makes it clear for you. But also, if you refuse to accept that, I don't know what to tell you. First off, before I say anything, I send my deepest condolences to his friends, his family, and all of his loved ones, because no one should ever have to go through anything like this, ever. First, you have to look at the source of the pylon. And all of this pylon began basically with Nathan Kaufness. And when you're asking who is that, he's a postdoctoral researcher who has made many publicly horrible racist statements, including being an advocate for race realism, i.e. he's promoting that scientific racism, saying that there are differences in things such as behavior or intelligence based on your race. In a blog post, he argued that, quote, in a meritocracy, Harvard faculty would be recruited from the best of the best students, which means the number of black professors would approach 0%. And that black people, quote, would disappear from almost all high-profile positions outside of sports and entertainment, among a bunch of other horrible fucking racist statements. So if you think him being the source of this sudden pylon doesn't matter, come the fuck on.
Tens of thousands gathered at a vigil in Trafalgar Square. Prominent public figures backed calls condemning what they described as relentless harassment.
It is so important and to come together and fight for justice for Professor Jason Arday.
We told him he was loved. He held Diane's hands and he said, I love you. But he said, they hounded me to death.
Professor Jason Arday. When we say his name, do not miss out the professor. Because that is exactly what they wanted to do.
We all witnessed, all of us, a serious crime, and it's important that I use the word crime today.
But the most interesting reaction might not be happening in Westminster. It's happening among ordinary black people online, because The Guardian and Novara occupy a very different cultural position from something like the Daily Mail. Nobody is surprised when openly conservative publications attack somebody connected to diversity politics. That's expected, but when organizations perceived as progressive participate in the same media feeding frenzy, that feels like betrayal, and betrayal produces a completely different kind of anger, which brings us back to Malcolm. Malcolm's wolf and fox metaphor was deliberately provocative. The wolf doesn't pretend, the fox smiles. But applying that literally to modern Britain would be far too simple. The Guardian isn't secretly the Daily Mail. Novara isn't GB News wearing a Che Guevara t-shirt. There are serious ideological differences between these organizations. There are black people working inside them. There are people within both organizations who explicitly defended Arday from racist attacks. And there were legitimate questions surrounding Arday's career. But maybe the metaphor still tells us something about trust. Black audiences have spent years being encouraged to build relationships with supposedly progressive institutions. Read us, watch us, trust us. We're different. We're the good media. We're on your side. But Jason Arday's death appears to have reminded some people of something they perhaps should have known already. A media company isn't your friend. It isn't your enemy either. It's an institution.
Getting back to the Dr. Jason Arday story. Dr. Jason Arday is a doctor. He held a PhD from Liverpool John Moores University. The Darvo here is so absurd that I thought I might have got that wrong. So I asked, is anybody else calling him by his professional titles, doctor or professor? And according to this machine, Good Law Project and the Byline Times. And that's it. Me, good, and I stand to be corrected if you are a journalist who has correctly, if you treated this man with respect, let me know. I'll use your sources going forward. But most media sources are disrespecting the dead right now for no real reason.
One of the strangest things about Jason Arday's story is that almost everybody eventually claimed him. The right claimed his failures, the left claimed his persecution, universities claimed his success, the media claimed his downfall, and after his death, everybody began fighting over who was responsible. But somewhere inside all of those narratives was an actual person, a complicated person, possibly a deeply flawed person, a person who appears to have said things that deserve scrutiny, but still a person.